My name is Heather Vokush, and welcome to Witnessing History. Now, today we are delighted to be joined by R. Edward Lee, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I understand you were born in 1925.
1925, June 25th.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood? Where were you born and what was it like?
I'm the son of a coal miner with two siblings. I lived in a mining community where all of the labors were related to coal mining. But I was fortunate enough to be able to go at least a number of years to a small missionary school in the Black Belt of Alabama. The Black Belt, of course, is where they grew a lot of cotton in the South, and it's not because there were a lot of black people there, it's because of the color of the soil, by the way. That's why they call it the Black Belt. But anyhow, it was a small missionary school called Lincoln School, founded in 1867, immediately after the Civil War, founded by 9 black men. The school was one of the best in the South for many, many years. And it only stopped being a school after integration came in the South, and then they attempted to integrate children in schools. There was no longer a need for separate schools. But you would be interested in knowing that even though Lincoln School was a black school, many of the teachers were white. They had come from the North, they had come from Ohio and New England to teach. So much of my learning came from young, white, adventurous women who weren't afraid to come into the South and teach. There were black people on the staff too after a while, not originally. There were only white people on the staff. Anyhow, that's a long story. I graduated from Lincoln School. I went to school with a woman named Coretta Scott, who became Coretta Scott-King. I knew her like a sister almost, and I dated her sister for 2 years. We were in high school, and then we went off to college. She went to Antioch. Coretta went to Antioch. I went to Earlham and enjoyed 4 years as a student at Earlham. And in the 1960s, late 1960s, I became a trustee of Earlham College. I became its first black trustee, and I served for 9 years as a trustee, going back and forth to the college from New York for board meetings and that sort of thing. But I had a good experience at Earlham, a very good experience. And I'm so pleased that I went there, and I will never forget it. I'm working on a little memoir right now called I Heard the Preaching of the Elders, which is taken from a black spiritual title. But the memoir is focused on Earlham College, really. But of course now, we haven't discussed that the Army much before. I sort of skipped.
So we're going to go back just a little bit. Now, from Alabama, did you move very much before you entered the military, or was it?
No, I entered the military right after high school.
Can you describe the process of entering the military at that time?
Well, at that time, they sent you a notice when you became 18 years of age with a draft, and they call it the greetings.
The greetings?
The greetings, and the young guys would say, I got my greetings today, you know, and that sort of stuff. Because you got a letter, but at the top it said greetings, and off you went to the recruitment station, you know. And mine was in Fort Benning, Georgia, where I was given a battery of tests and the Army decided that I should be in the Air Force, you see. I was much too tall to be a pilot. Number one. Number two, I was the wrong complexion, you see, at that time. But I think they had some sense of what was going to happen down the road, and the officers were trying to recruit people who might fit into the scheme of things later, even though when I went into the service, it was terribly segregated. They kept us off, separated from the other people on the base. You were completely separated from them. My first jobs were those of being a heavy-duty equipment operator and also a refueling operator for B-17s. That was most of what I did when I was in the service. I was an MP for a short period of time.
I'd like to go back just a little bit to
Yeah, sure.
to this test, just to be sure that I understand it. Now, first, when people got the greetings, what was the reaction? Was it like, oh, I don't want to go, or?
No. Most of the young people that I knew, remember now, these were 18-year-olds,
Right.
adventurous, wanting to get away from home. They did not have strong feelings about fighting in a war where they were not equally accepted. As time wore on, it became such.
At the time, was there much of an understanding of what this war was and who was fighting and why?
I think they had some understanding of it.
Was the political awareness of all of the details very strong, or was it mainly there's a problem and we are necessary to
There
go
was some
fight?
political awareness of it. I think the thing that soldiers, black soldiers, felt the most was that they were segregated. And I could tell you many funny stories about that, because some blacks are very fair-skinned, light-skinned. I can recall 2 instances when soldiers came to the base. They were hustled off to white barracks because the people who brought them there thought they were white. And these guys raised holy Cain and didn't want to be there, and they had to go fetch them and bring them over to where we were, because they had lived all their lives as black people.
Okay.
You understand?
Exactly.
And there was one fellow from South Carolina, another came from Florida, from Louisiana, New Orleans, in fact. It's Creole. And very black in manners and customs and expectations and that kind of thing. It also happened that one captain, a bombardier, was shot down. He was from Pittsburgh. And when they brought him home, he didn't get killed. He was brought home, and everybody had thought he was white because there were no black bombardiers in B-17s. But when he got to the airport, there were only black people there greeting him.
Oh, man.
And the newspapers had a ball with that.
Now, how was this for you, though? I mean, and I also understand that when you went through your testing, that you actually had wanted to be able to go abroad and to do something else.
When I was wanting to go abroad, it was wanting to go abroad only because of boredom. I was in the Air Force, and I was doing nothing most of the time until I got the assignments on my own, really. By the way, the first sergeant was very upset that I went out and found a job for myself. He said, "You aren't supposed to do that." That's not how he said it. He said it in GI language, you know. Anyhow, and I volunteered for the infantry twice. I volunteered for the field artillery. I thought I could get out by becoming a paratrooper. I was accepted for none of those things.
Because?
It was like they had me marked for something else. They just kept me there, and there were men who were sent to these units who were better educated than I, and I was only a high school graduate. And these men were college people, but they moved them out, and maybe they wanted them to be leaders in these units. That's why I wanted to go overseas, just to get away to do something, which I thought would be exciting. I could have gotten killed too, of course, but that never entered my mind. I don't think it does in most 21-year-old minds.
Exactly.
I was about to say that men who were shipped out, many of them were prominent athletes. And me, I was kept. And then finally, just before I was discharged from the Air Force as a sergeant, I was offered the opportunity to become a B-29 engineer. So I think they may have been just thinking that something is going to come along that we can put in and do with this guy. Also, they created a small medium bomber group. But I went down to the hangar line. I couldn't walk through a medium bomber. I had to
because you're so tall.
Too tall. And then when the B-29s came, I did the same thing. I went to the hangar line, and sure enough, I could walk straight through it without bending. And that's why they offered me that position. I hope in terms of also because of my intellect, maybe. But anyhow, that's how it happened.
So
but I never served overseas.
a couple of times you've said that you felt that they thought you were marked for something else. So they saw something in you. However, it was still this, racism that because of your skin
Right.
color they would not,
Right,
Yeah.
you could never move into those things, but many of my friends that I went in with, they took them out of the Air Force and put them into the infantry.
Okay. Well, how was that fight for your country, even though your country was discriminating against you?
Yeah.
At the same time, what was that about?
I'm not too sure we gave too much weight to that at that time.
Mm-hmm.
That came a period when it did come up and was very important, and we talked about it among ourselves.
Can you talk a little bit about that
Sure.
period?
I remember when guys in one of my units in Florida wrote to their congressman. They appealed to the NAACP because of their treatment and separation and discrimination.
Was this like 44, 45? or-
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, 44, 45.
Okay.
We had our own separate swimming pool, but next to a canal where there was an orange grove on the other side of it, way away from the remainder of the people who were running the air base. This was down in Florida. But in each instance, in every instance, at every installation where I was, there was very rigid segregation in most cases. I do remember movies were held in I can't remember where it was not in the theater. This was in Florida. But we did not segregate ourselves there.
Mm-hmm.
When you went to the theater, you went in to see a movie. You found a place where you could sit and stayed there, and nobody complained about it either.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a couple of Army shows, musical shows that traveled throughout that part of the country in Florida,
Okay.
and they were integrated too.
What happened when you wrote these letters to these various groups?
Not much happened,
Okay.
really. Not much happened. Complaints, but not a great deal resulted from it as such. People writing to their congressman and this sort of stuff, because segregation was so firmly entrenched at that time. It was a completely different kettle of fish than what we have today. Many men grew angry as their time went on in the service. And in the Deep South, it was even worse because you had bus and train segregation,
Exactly.
and men rebelled against it. And there were fights, there were arrests by people sitting in the wrong part of the bus and that sort of thing, soldiers. But they came back home. Most of that came after. They were determined that they weren't going to accept the same kind of treatment as they had before.
I think another thing that happened afterwards was that many African Americans got these so-called blue discharges, which were dishonorable discharges, even though they had served with honor, but that meant they could not take advantage of the GI Bill.
Right.
It was difficult to get a job, and so it perpetuated after,
Yes.
the service as well.
I know men who got dishonorable discharges. I don't relate it so much with a blue discharge, except as something that I've heard of. But I do know that there were dishonorable discharges, many of them, sometimes because of a black resisting abuse of some kind in the service, And he would get written up in a bad kind of way, and that record sort of stayed with him, and I dated till he was sent home.
And so this, racism perpetuated after that.
Right.
Now, so basically, you left the Army in 1945?
46.
Okay, so can you tell us what you did after that? So we heard a little bit about you did your bachelor's, and then you did your master's, and then you went on to have this very interesting career in social work,
Right.
psychology.
Right.
When did you come to New York?
I came to New York in 1953, started to work at a very prestigious neighborhood house here called Hudson Guild on the Lower West Side in Chelsea. And I remained there for 7 years, thinking that I had to go and do something on my own, and I wanted to become more of a supervisor and so forth. So I left.
What do you mean by neighborhood house?
Neighborhood house is a settlement house. The first settlement house was developed in England. It was a scruffy area, and it was run by students.
What do these houses do? What happens in these houses?
There was information provided about housekeeping, about health,
Okay.
about children, and they called it a settlement house because the people who lived there were called settlers. So thus, settlement house. And they were the staff of these institutions. That's sort of gone out of style now. Settlement houses don't have settlers anymore. We have one house here in New York, I think, that still does that, and that's probably Henry Street,
Okay.
which is on the Lower East Side of New York. But it was that kind of thing, and then they got involved with community planning and well baby care, and sometimes even organizing the community to do things to better help themselves, you know. And the settlers, the workers there, helped them achieve these things.
You have seen these very interesting societal changes in New York for over 60 years, then,
Yes.
that means.
Yes.
Can you tell us what are some of the major societal changes? What are the interesting pieces of history that you would like to be sure that people don't forget in New York?
Well, at one period, there were a lot of gangs, organized gangs in New York, all over the city.
What year?
48 through
Okay.
the 50s. There was a heroin craze for a while among young people in New York, and I think that's gone now. It came back in the 80s, I think, with some, not with heroin so much, but with cocaine and that kind of thing. The gangs, the drug use, which was more predominant early on. There were fighting gangs. Kids killed each other with zip guns, they were called.
What's a zip
A
gun?
zip gun is a homemade gun that shot 22 bullets. And it was made with wood and a plunger to fire it and that sort of thing. And kids carried them, you know.
Were these specific ethnic groups or just across the board or
It's
specific?
across the board. Inner city neighborhoods had more of it, I'm sure. There were Irish gangs, there were Italian gangs, African American gangs, teenagers. And of course that's essentially gone now. You see some traces of it once in a while, like the Bloods.
There's certainly gang-related violence now, possibly not with zip guns, but
Right,
you know,
right.
that concept. When you look at society today here in New York, what are your feelings?
I think that we've come a long way. Not that there isn't a lot to be done yet. I think that to be true too. Certainly in New York, as in most cities spread throughout the United States, race relations have improved immeasurably. In the 1940s, there was just simply strict separation in 90% of the cases, and people separated themselves socially. That's not so much now as it used to be. I'm trying to remember the man who wrote a book called The Greatest Generation, a very popular book.
So you see improvements in, you know, race relations and
Well, he was talking mostly about men who were in the war. But The Greatest Generation struck me because I think there have been greater ones since in terms of people relating to each other easily. I see those kinds of differences.
so this is an optimistic view that the things
Yes, I do.
here look
I
better.
have an optimistic view. Most social workers have optimistic views.
How about when you look at the concept, at the different wars that the U.S. is involved in now?
To be perfectly honest with you, it drives me crazy. You know, people killing each other all the time, and it seems that no other way to do it except shoot and kill each other. I was thinking the other day about almost all of my life, certainly from the 1940s up until now. There's been some fighting going on somewhere, and I look at the television sets now and I see this business going on in the Ukraine, and it seems so useless and senseless, and perhaps somebody at some point will get the message that it just doesn't work to do it that way.
Now, I understand that you have a newsletter. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, it's called the Black Facts Journal, which was printed for maybe 20 years, and then it got too expensive. And at the same time, having a website, I could go online and put it there for people to read, and they don't even have to pay for it, you know. Mm-hmm. Just read it. It's African American history, the Black history and opinion. Mm-hmm. I comment on the things that are going on, as well as talking about the past as it related to black people, especially in the United States, but to some extent in Canada and Africa and other places, and Europe as well. It was a quarterly. It's still going to remain a quarterly on the internet. If somebody wants to download it and print it, that will cost them $3. But if he wants to just read it, it's there to be read. Now that's the journal. I also do something called the Black Facts Calendar, which is an annual. The Black Facts Calendar is historical. Each month there's a profile, and so far, this was the 25th year of the Black Facts Calendar. Each month is a profile of a person born before 1900, a black person. And I try to get away from people like Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver, because everybody knows about them, but they have been in the profiles also. I just want people to know that black people were trying to do things to help themselves, even in the mean, evil days of slavery and before. And there are many things that you would not expect black people who have been doing, but they were doing these kinds of things. They were digging for gold in California and up in the Northwest and that sort of thing. They were not all just servile people accepting what was handed to them. There were people who were crusaders and pathfinders, and those are the people that I write about in the calendar in a profile every month. Each month has a profile, and so far there have been about 300 of them since I started it. I'm figuring 12 per year over 25 years or so, you see. Mm-hmm. This is just for people who like it. The sun signs, horoscope signs, I don't know whether you call them horoscope signs, but zodiac signs of people who work in different areas, contemporaries, and I do that to show people the amazing number of things that black people are doing today that they were not doing when I was a child, you see. You didn't see a black banker when I was a child, but there were black bankers even before me, but not many, but there were some. Mm-hmm. People in high up in communications, in the business world and so forth. And I do it also to impress upon children, black children in particular, no matter where he comes from, that there are opportunities out there if he is willing to put forth the effort. I mean, if somebody comes from Crossroads, South Carolina, okay, what is he now? He's the head of Dime Savings Bank, you know, or something like that. Mm-hmm. I want people to know that people are doing these things. Now, that's the second part of the calendar. Third part of the calendar is that there's a question every single day, 365 questions, arranged in categories. Little print, but that's what it's there for. So my calendar really is not the kind of calendar you're going to throw away. You're going to keep it.
So can I ask you these questions? You write all the questions?
Yes,
Can you
I
give
do.
us an example of one of the questions?
They might be related to music. They might be related to industry. They might be related to the Caribbean.
So a knowledge question.
That's
Test
right.
your knowledge
Those
about
are the kinds
this.
of questions that I have.
People all across the world can access the website and read
Sure.
these things that you write and also get the questions.
My journal is read in faraway places right now.
If you have one message that you could share with young people across the world, what would your one message be?
I suppose it would be some sort of message related to anti-war. Earlham College is a Quaker college and very pacifist-minded, and much of that got soaked into me as a young man in college. But I don't think there's anything more important right now than trying to stop this constant drift to killing each other. And I sometimes think that it will be good to have a woman president of the United States. Because as long as it's not Golda Meir and the Iron Lady from Great Britain, they were tough sisters. But I mean, women see things differently than men do about killing, and they see children differently. They see humanity a little differently than we do, and men work on their testosterone. Try and escape this thing of killing each other all the time in Africa and Asia and in the Arab countries. Lord knows it's all over. And frankly, it drives me crazy, even though I was a veteran. I feel a little bit differently now, though, than I felt in 1943 when I was being drafted into the service.
And if you could say something to that young man in 1943, give him one piece of advice, what would you tell him?
I would tell him he should have been more thoughtful, that he should have considered, and I did think about, I had a pacifist teacher. My basketball coach, in fact, was a pacifist. And he often talked pacifism and peace and this sort of stuff. But, you know, being an adventurous and so forth, you wanted to get away from home, you wanted to do different things and so forth. I don't know, other than I would say that I should have simply been more thoughtful.
Okay, well, on that amazing note, we can't thank you enough for having joined us today.
Oh, thank you.
And, no, it was so interesting talking to you, and thank you for having shared your wisdom and your beautiful insights with us. And we also thank you so much for having joined us today. Thank you.